With the year soon drawing to a close, I wanted to do a video highlighting one of the more memorable indie games I played in 2024. Also, for a guy whose handle is Pixel Padre, my reviews sure have featured a whole lot of polygons. While I do enjoy those big budget AAA titles, a lot of the games I play are actually either indie or retro games. In my parish office, I've got a shadow box for Chrono Trigger. So Core Keeper was one of those indie titles that had been on my radar for quite a while. And when it hit 1.0 earlier this year, I finally pulled the trigger and picked it up. The game's vibrant pixel art drew my attention early on, but part of what kept me away from the early access release was that in those graphics there appeared quite a few scenes of farming. Now, I'm enough of a crusty old man to have played the original Harvest Moon on the Super NES. And while I might have only given that game the time of day because the visuals reminded me of A Link to the Past, nonetheless I ended up playing it quite a bit. This is to say, the farming in Core Keeper didn't scare me because I'm immune to farming sims, but because I'm not immune. As a priest, I have to be wary of games that are too addictive, that can sap away an obscene amount of my time. Also, it may be that some of you have experienced gamer's remorse, when you binge a little too hard for a little too long, and then reflect, what am I doing with my life? For some reason, long hours of blasting aliens doesn't trigger that in me. But if I spend too long on virtual nesting, meticulously building the perfect farm or home in a game, then that remorse starts to kick in. Maybe I'm just weird that way. So despite loving the presentation, including the sound, the music really sets the mood perfectly in this game. In spite of that, I was wary about diving into Core Keeper. And I won't lie, when I finally made that dive, I did indeed get hooked really hard. I'd be trying to write a homily, but unable to stop thinking about that next upgrade to my base. Core Keeper takes place in a vast, but not endless, subterranean world. One which would doubtlessly take you quite a while to trek across if you were intent on mapping every inch of it. The bare-bones plot sees you transported to this foreign land when you come into contact with a mysterious object deep in the jungle. And you're going to have to defeat baddies and fetch some powerful artifacts if you ever want to return. There is some lore which you can peel away at as you progress, but the narrative here is not the main focus. While, as I've alluded, there is a good bit of base customization, what strikes me as the primary thrust of the game is exploration. A lot of the time spent on those other activities is done for the sake of enabling you to more freely explore this exotic underworld. It's hard to talk about Core Keeper without drawing comparisons to Minecraft or Terraria, even Stardew Valley. The world uses procedural generation and features a variety of biomes and subbiomes with unique enemies and treasures to find. Provided that your pickaxe is up to the task, you can shape that world as you see fit, as almost everything you encounter is made up of mineable or collectible materials. One of your first goals will likely be clearing a space for a basic workshop, and from there you'll pick a wall and just start tunneling. You do have to eat. You have stamina to manage, and I suppose Deep Rock Galactic might be another point of comparison, as along with minerals and crops you're going to find yourself encountering plenty of hostile creatures in the caverns which you tunnel into. Combat is not especially deep, but it doesn't really need to be. What's here works. You can opt for a melee build or ranged combat, or be a mage or a summoner. And there are definitely some swarms and some bosses that can lead to you collecting your own gravestone on your next turn. The game, however, has one of those reverse difficulty curves. You may start out pretty fragile, but if you're smart about those upgrades, you're likely to be steamrolling most bosses before the end of your adventure. For better or for worse, Core Keeper lets you play how you want. In addition to farming and crafting, you can also sink a lot of time into fishing if that's your thing, or even automation. It's no Factorio, but if you're into factory/automation games, there are systems here that will scratch that itch as well. The thing is, you don't have to delve too deep into those systems if you don't really care to. Core Keeper does a wonderful job of introducing each new element in small, digestible chunks. I never felt overwhelmed, as if I needed to spend hours reading a wiki in order to grasp the mechanics. Similar to Minecraft, you'll find videos out there of people who have built these elaborate bases, underground towns complete with their own museums and go-kart racing tracks, extensive crop fields, and even monster farms, as there are tiles that have a chance of spawning various enemies, which may in turn have a chance of dropping rare items. So you can go all out on the creative side of things. Or you can create a bite-sized farm like mine, with a modest workshop and just enough space to dabble in those other elements to the degree that you feel necessary. While you might not get the best gear as quickly, or maybe at all, you'll still most likely be able to hold your own as you brave those dark and distant caverns. In this way, things can feel a bit anticlimactic. Since the game doesn't demand that you optimize your base or your build, Core Keeper risks becoming much too easy unless you intentionally up the stakes. But maybe that's okay. Sometimes we humans can over-prepare, stressing ourselves out because we become convinced that we need all these things which are not nearly as essential for our happiness as the world may want us to think. Prior to entering seminary, I recall doing some self-evaluation. As a semi-successful entrepreneur, I had gotten used to a certain level of material comfort. I liked my condo on the golf course with plenty of space and a scenic view of the lake, and I had plans, of course, for far more extravagant luxuries as my income grew. Could I really say goodbye to those plans if Christ was calling me to the priesthood, if I said yes? But upon reflection, it struck me that when I wasn't asleep, the vast majority of my time was spent in just a single room of my condo, my home office where my computer happened to be. And I realized that as long as I have one room which I can customize to my liking, that's kind of all I need. Now, there was a whole lot more self-evaluation that went into that choice. But that tendency to assume that we need a lot more than we really do, it can affect everything from our gaming habits to our spiritual lives. In the quest to lead a holy and virtuous life, there too we can quite easily get caught up in feeling like nothing we do is ever enough. I need to build up massive stores of prayers and sacrifices. Only then will I be ready for the spiritual challenges to come. Now, I realize that the more common error is the opposite. Being spiritually lax is a more widespread problem than being overly scrupulous. Moreover, I also want to affirm that there is such a thing as healthy ambition, both in the practical and the spiritual sense of that term. But if, in the pursuit of spiritual growth, or just any meaningful growth as a person, you find yourself wrestling with scrupulosity, such that no amount of preparation ever feels good enough for you, then perhaps it's time you allowed yourself to say, "Here I am, Lord. I may be the worst of your disciples, but I'm yours all the same." As sometimes that's all that needs to be said. Secular thinkers may liken this to telling yourself, "I am enough," which does indeed sound nice. But for the Christian, the reality is more like, "Lord, your grace is enough," which I would argue is a thought both more comforting and more true. And that's all I've got for today. May you go with God. May you like and subscribe, and may we pray for one another until we meet again.